Reading made us who we are. But today, the very skill that once defined humanity is beginning to fade. Our brains, once trained to dive into words, now skim across them, chasing fragments of meaning before moving on to the next distraction. And maybe without even noticing, we're losing something that took millennia to build. Because we weren't born to read. No instinct or ancient reflex prepared our minds for it. Somewhere in the last few thousand years, humanity invented something that changed the structure of the brain and the shape of thought itself. Every time you read, you're using a circuit that didn't exist in nature. A system the brain built from scratch to turn symbols into meaning, ink into imagination, and silence into language. The human brain was never made to read. No gene, no anatomical structure was born with that purpose. We evolved to recognize faces, hunt, speak, listen, and run from danger, but not to decipher symbols on a page. Reading is a recent invention, created a little over 6,000 years ago. And when the first humans began to carve ideas into clay or draw sounds onto stone, something extraordinary happened. The brain had to reinvent itself. With no time for biological evolution, it recycled ancient regions, adapting functions that once served entirely different purposes. Areas that used to recognize objects and expressions began to recognize letters and words. It was the beginning of a silent yet profound transformation, one of the greatest neurological reconfigurations in human history. And every person who learns to read repeats that revolution. In just a few years, a child's brain rebuilds itself, creating new connections between vision, hearing, language, and emotion. Reading isn't natural. It's neural engineering, an evolutionary trick the human mind invented to decipher the invisible. When humans began to read, the brain didn't gain a new area. It didn't evolve for that, it adapted. Reading is a striking example of what neuroscientists call neuroplasticity, the brain's ability to turn old functions into new ones. Instead of creating a reading module, the brain recycled existing regions, especially those responsible for recognizing shapes, faces, and patterns. Over time, these areas began to connect with circuits for language and memory. The result was the birth of a new neural system, one that unites vision, hearing, emotion, and symbolic thought. Today, every time you read a word, that system activates like an orchestra. Your eyes capture the shapes, your visual cortex translates them into sounds, and your brain sends them to regions that give them meaning, context, memory, feeling. And that's where reading becomes more than decoding symbols. It turns visual signals into mental experience. When you read the word fire, your brain doesn't just process letters. It ignites the memory of heat, light, danger, or of a campfire you've never actually seen, but can vividly imagine. That's the power of reading. It creates symbolic reality, a technology that doesn't depend on machines, but on connections, invisible networks of neurons that turn the human brain into a space for ideas. Reading isn't just a biological act, it's also a cultural one. And that means every language shapes the brain in a different way. In alphabetic languages like Portuguese or English, the brain works with sounds. Each letter represents a phoneme, and the reader must turn visual symbols into inner speech. That's why these languages activate regions linked to hearing and the rhythm of speech. But in languages like Chinese, the process is completely different. Each character represents a word or idea. Reading, in this case, demands a much stronger visual memory, since the brain needs to recognize thousands of unique forms. These differences reshape the neural map of reading. One study followed a bilingual patient who, after suffering a stroke, lost the ability to read in Chinese, yet could still read in English. Both languages lived in distinct circuits within the same brain. The discovery was clear. Writing is not just a code, it's a way of sculpting the brain. Every culture creates its own reading circuit, and together, they reveal something essential about us. There is no such thing as the human brain. There are brains shaped by alphabet sounds, symbols, and stories. Reading, then, is an act of translation between the biological and the cultural, the universal and the local. And perhaps that's why when we read in another language, we don't just change languages, we change minds. When you read a story, your brain doesn't stay still. It doesn't just understand, it experiences. Neuroscience shows that when you read a scene involving movement, someone running, for instance, the same regions of your motor cortex activate as if you were moving too. When you read a description of a scent, heat, or pain, your brain recreates those sensations in miniature. Deep reading is a form of simulation. It transforms words into experience. That's why when we read a tragedy, we suffer along with it. When we read a love story, we fall in love too. And when we read about courage, we feel something we may never have lived. But now we know what it feels like. Researcher Marianne Wolf calls this the empathic miracle of reading. Each page forges new connections between emotion, language, and imagination, a circuit that exists only in the reading brain. But this kind of reading requires time, silence, and attention. It's not the same as scanning a headline, a post, or a caption. Deep reading is the opposite of haste. It's lingering with something until it changes you. Reading, then, isn't an escape from reality. It's an expansion of what we call real. Because in the end, every story is a simulation of life. And every reader, a human being reshaped by someone else's experience. Not all brains read the same way. And perhaps that's exactly where the true power of reading lies, in difference. Neuroscientist Marianne Wolf spent decades studying what happens when reading doesn't follow the expected path. That's the case with dyslexia, a difference in how the brain processes sounds and symbols. Children with dyslexia aren't less intelligent. They simply have a different neural architecture. The circuits that turn letters into sounds work differently, which makes learning to read slower. But in return, those same minds often show above-average visual reasoning, creativity, and non-linear thinking. Einstein, Leonardo da Vinci, Picasso, all are believed to have been dyslexic. And that might explain why they thought in such original ways. A mind that encounters obstacles in reading the literal world may see the invisible world more clearly. Dyslexia reminds us that the reading brain is not a mold. It's an open work, a system capable of reorganizing itself infinitely. Every person who learns to read makes the brain work in a unique way. Reading is, in itself, an act of neurological diversity. An understanding that changes everything. Reading stops being a pattern and becomes an expression of human uniqueness. For millennia, reading shaped the human brain. Now the brain is shaping a new kind of reading, one that is shallower, faster, and more scattered. Reading on screens, scrolling, switching between notifications. All of this is rewiring the circuit of attention. The brain that once dove deep now hops from thought to thought, searching for the next instant reward. Neuroscientists call this superficial reading. Digital reading trains the brain to scan content, not to comprehend it. The mind learns to recognize words but not to inhabit them. And what's lost in this process isn't just focus, it's the ability to think deeply. Deep reading, the kind that connects emotion with analysis, empathy with imagination, is beginning to fade. Marianne Wolf warns that if this trend continues, future generations may not develop the same empathic circuitry that traditional reading cultivated for centuries. Without time to reflect, the brain stops building bridges and starts reacting to fragments. The result is a mind that's hyper-connected, yet paradoxically distracted. Reading has ceased to be a space of silence. It's become a race for stimuli. But the brain, unlike machines, needs pause to understand. The danger isn't just losing the habit of reading, it's losing the capacity to be present in an idea, a story, or in oneself. The brain wasn't born to read, but it learned. And if it was capable of creating that circuit once, it can recreate it as many times as it needs. Reading is a human invention, and also a human choice. To keep it alive, we must protect the time and silence it requires. It all begins with a simple gesture. Someone reading to someone else. That's how the brain learns to listen, imagine, and wait. That bond between voice, story, and presence is the first foundation of the deep reader. Each shared reading teaches the brain to inhabit another person's thoughts. It's the birth of empathy, introspection, and critical consciousness. And contrary to what it may seem, reading is not a solitary act. It's an encounter between minds separated by space and time. Reading is the quietest and most revolutionary act humanity has ever invented. In an age where everything fights for our attention, reading is an act of resistance. To read slowly in a world of haste, to read deeply in the midst of noise, to read, to remember that thought is still the freest place there is. Because as long as someone, somewhere, opens a book, the human brain will continue to reinvent itself, and with it, the very idea of humanity. The next discovery can change everything. Let science revolutionize your thinking. Subscribe and join us on the journey.